All right, all right, all right. Welcome. Super excited. I am Dr. Emily here today, and we have with us an amazing product designer, Deena, who creates amazing digital experiences in UI UX for full stack, for mobile, and I just can't wait to hear more. So she is actually doing it, what many of us are striving to do and become that amazing six-figure software developer. And I can't wait to learn more about Deena and her work. Welcome, Deena. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Awesome, awesome. So Deena, do you want to just start by telling us a little bit about your journey and how you got where you are today?
Sure, sure. I studied graphic design. I came from a graphic design background in college, but went immediately into product design at a small company called WeWork. And I started as an intern, and I loved it because it was super small at the time, and I got to touch every product. I got to touch mobile apps, web apps, all that kind of stuff. Um, and worked in large companies. I've worked in startups and have really honed in working with small startups in the beginning when they are kind of conceptualizing the idea and don't really know exactly what it's going to look like, what it's going to do. And I love to extract that idea from their head and turn it into a prototype, a clickable prototype.
That's awesome. Oh my goodness. That's so amazing. So, tell me, Deena. So, you've had this amazing journey. So now though, so you started off, working the traditional, like more 9 to 5 style salary job, and now you're freelance. Can you walk us through like what that transition was like for you?
Sure. I got a pretty big network actually from working in large companies, which has been very helpful for freelancing. Um, I think I think getting into the space is definitely scary, and there's some lag periods. Um, but but it's kind of fun as well, and exciting to see what new projects I can find. But let's see. I think building up the network is the most important piece. And luckily, coming from a large company, that actually was beneficial for me.
Oh, awesome. So are you saying that, starting off your career, even though you ended up freelance, with working big projects as more like a kind of contract slash consultant work, would you say that starting off your career as like a salaried position as part of a bigger company really helped you expand your professional network then?
Professional network, and I also think as a product designer, it is incredibly important to work at a company first, and learn from other people, work with engineers, work with product managers, work with a team, because there are so many nuances to the process. And um, if you're not familiar with the product design whole process, it's really hard to do that on your own when you're freelancing, I think. But when I first started product design, they didn't really teach it in school. They were just starting to teach like interaction design in schools. And like I said, I came from a graphic design background, so I really didn't have any knowledge about like front end or just usability. And it was sort of the beginning of the internet again when these apps like became really popular, and everybody is kind of transitioning into a tech company because they needed an app, they needed a website, they needed some way to sign into their product. So now it's a lot more clear what the product design process is, what UX research is, how you start, how you iterate on your designs, all that kind of stuff. I think it's definitely important for a new designer to work in a team.
Awesome. Oh, that's such great advice. And actually, one thing I want to make sure that people know who are here, Deena, because we often focus on tech jobs in general and specifically, full stack, and mobile software developers. Not everyone here may actually know what a product designer does and how that differs from the downstream implementers on the team. I was just curious, could you kind of just share, like, for someone that's never heard of product designer before, can you just summarize what that would be, what that role would be?
Yes, yes. So as a product designer, I really focus in on the UX, the user experience, and the UI, the user interface. And typically, if I'm working at a large company or whatever size company that has a full product team, so a product manager, a designer, and an engineer, and there's some peripheral roles as well. It really depends on where you are, which company you're at. Um, the focus is on understanding the business objectives from the product manager, who typically is responsible for those ideas, understanding the users and what they need from the product, what they're looking for, what they want, and also understanding what the engineers are capable of building and what's going to make the code, what you guys are doing functional and clean, and you're the advocate for the tech, I'm the advocate for the user, and often the product manager is the advocate for the business. Sometimes there is
Oh,
no product
nice.
manager, so uh, or product leans very heavily on engineering and design to kind of run their own process, which happens at a lot of places, and they're just more there to facilitate the project. But as a product designer, I get into Figma. If you guys don't know what Figma is, it's like the main tool that designers use to lay out everything. There's brainstorming tools in there. There's ways to create mind maps. There's ways to iterate on designs. So it's a really great tool for a designer, and that's basically like 100% of where I live. And there's also dev tools in there around how to style things. It gives engineers a little bit of the front end uh, to help like get the process going.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much. That was awesome. Did you have more to add? Sorry.
I was just going to say I could talk a little bit more about the product design process and kind of how it goes from the beginning to end and beginning to ship or beginning to launch for products.
Oh, yeah. That'd be awesome. And I'd love to hear like how the product designer, kind of works with the project manager and the developer. Because I think sometimes when we're just so focused on learning how to code, we might miss the fact that what we're creating is for other humans and there's other stakeholders involved in that process, right? Like that's something our internship experience like gives real experience, just like you spoke in your experience of like some things you can't simulate in an educational environment without just doing it, right? So that's why we
Totally.
have that in our process. And I'd love to hear more about, especially like the relationship between the project manager, product owner, but also like the developer and how they might actually not even understand like all this stuff is happening behind the scenes to give them the requirements that they're implementing that they sometimes grumble about.
Well, my goal in the product design process is to get the engineers into the conversation early because hopefully that reduces the amount of grumblings. Hopefully that helps them
Mm.
empower them to put their feedback in early, put your feedback in early to the process, and just get your ideas out there of what you need and how you want to build it because I think that makes for a much better experience. It also just makes for a much better product that you're excited to build because it's built partially the way that you agreed to build it instead of just getting the downstream effect of here's what you have to do. Um, I don't know if you guys use like tickets or agile or any of these
Yeah.
frameworks. Okay, great. So typically the product manager will come in with a bunch of um, requirements.
Mhm.
And about hopefully very general requirements about what we're building. The product design process doesn't always include this, but the best way to start is user research. And that is a bunch of different ways to collect information about um, preferences, pain points for the users. There might be surveys, there might be face-to-face interviews, there might be um, prototypes drawn out that we've put in front of users and they kind of click around and see, we can kind of watch them and see what they're getting, what they're not getting. But usually the upfront user research is a lot of like interviewing, surveys, diary studies. That's like when people write down over and over again, like how they go through a process. There's lots of different methods for user research, and it's a really good foundation to understand like the pain points, everything a designer needs to know to create a seamless experience. Once that happens, once you get your research done, the kind of magic of a product designer is like extracting the use cases, what we think the problems are that we can solve, and wireframing those out into an interface that eventually will make sense to them. And wireframing is literally like gray boxes on a screen with maybe words that explain what's happening or what those boxes are, something very bare bones so that everyone can kind of just get an idea of like, okay, when you click on this button, it's going to start this process for them, or it's going to kick off this form for them, or it's going to load the page over here that we need. And it's just a really good visual to understand how actually is this going to work, and getting users getting users input on those prototypes are also super valuable. So that's often part of the process if you can do it. There's a lot of the time companies are moving so fast that they would rather build and put it out there and test and iterate once it's live. So sometimes the user research doesn't happen as intensely as other places. Um, Once the wireframes are kind of all set and like decided on and everyone's on board, that's kind of when the, at least in my experience, the product manager will start breaking down what are the back end things that need to be done, what are the front end things that need to be done, what database things need to be done, like whatever kind of general functions need to happen in order for that prototype to work. And that's where I love to get engineering input to make sure that it doesn't go off the rails too quickly. And while all that's happening, I'm working on the UI. So refining those designs into something that looks like what you see when you open an app, like the colors, fonts, the layouts, the how close things get put together, what shape are the buttons, where does the button live, all that kind of stuff. Icons are a big thing. a lot of a
Yeah.
lot of just a lot of, and you just do it over as a designer, you kind of just do it over and over and over again until it looks perfect, until you're happy with how it looks, and everyone else is happy with as well as how it looks, how it's functioning. um, and then there's also more testing, user testing that sometimes happens. And this is usability testing, not user research. Usability testing just really ensures that what you've designed is a seamless experience. Like it's intuitive. Because sometimes you are so focused on a design and you're like, yeah, this makes sense because we got from A to Z this way, but the way you've designed it, it's so funny, like how clear when you do a user research session, how like close to the project you can be. And there's within like 3 to 5 users, you're going to find something that is like, oh my God, we totally have to change, where this lives. Uh, or we have to, change the information architecture a little bit so that they understand where to go to get to their profile, stuff like that. And then that gets broken down once the designs are finalized, that gets broken down into tickets, like front end tickets. And, and it's a lot of conversations between the engineer and the designer. What I like to do is create a sort of design system where it's like, here's all the colors, here's all the fonts, here's all the components that are reusable, here's the search bar that we use in every place, here's the button that we use in every place. And now Figma, you can click on those items and it gives you the front end code for that, which is amazing. And then also create a Loom video where I walk through the entire prototype. If there's any animations, I kind of demo those and explain how they happen. Just generally walking through the entire like handoff document that really will help the engineers understand how to build it correctly. And then the engineers
Awesome.
build, and they ask me lots of questions in the meantime.
I know that's amazing. Thank you so much, Deena. I'm sure those of you that are watching would be surprised to hear like just how much work and effort can go into creating the design that you might be implementing. Because sometimes I have students ask me, like, they're like, I don't think I want to do front end because I'm not artistic. And I'm like, no, no, like there is like a whole nother design phase that like comes into it before that. And you can choose to be part of that, but like, right, like, engineering is about creating the vision versus the product designer is actually like defining, like taking it starts off as this amorphous thing that like people just abstractly talk about. It's a dream, right? And the product designer's job is then to take that dream and make it at least an artistic representation, right? This actually has some similarities like in science, like to kind of give everyone an analogy. Like in science, like there's science fiction and it's just an imagined reality, and then we start to make it. Like someone made an invisibility cloak, right? They created it, but like first someone has to think it. So the product designer is like the first person that's actually like thinking through what could this cool thing be, and how does it need to work to be functional, and also like artistic, right? It has artistic design, so it's aesthetically pleasing. People want to use it because of both its artistic appeal, aesthetics, as well as the functionality. Would you say, Deena, that kind of summarizes the role that's happening for the product designer up front?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a really great analogy.
Awesome. Cool. I love that. Super good. And again, if anybody has questions, I've just been taking notes in the chat. But if anybody has questions, please pop them in the comment section, and Deena will absolutely walk through them. So I'm just curious now, Deena, I have a couple other questions for you. Thank you so much for walking us through what a product designer works on. That was so amazing. And there's elements that we've been incorporating in the internship, but I can see that we have a little bit more work to do to to help grow our projects and really focus on that design. I think there's more that we could do there based on what you've been describing. So I'm super excited to move forward with that. Can like so could you share, what like a typical day might look like? And maybe you can contrast this for like when you worked for a company versus now that you work more, freelance. Like what does a typical day doing what you do look like?
Yeah. So working at a company, typically the day starts with a stand-up. And if you guys don't know what a stand-up is, I'm sure you do, but it's literally you stand up. And the idea is that you stand up because you don't want this to be a long meeting. It should be a quick meeting. You all stand huddled together and you explain, or you just check in. Here's what I did, and I have a question about this. Let's make sure to chat, you and me. Here's what I'm planning on working on today, just so everyone is like, yep, that makes sense. I'm gonna work on that as well. So let's collaborate. Just to check in and make sure that, everything's going okay. After that, it could, depending on the part of the process that I'm in, I'm usually sat in front of a whiteboard or with my iPad and drawing, or I'm sat in front of my computer and wireframing in Figma, lots of time in Figma. I might be looking at inspiration, doing some market research. What do other companies do? What do other apps look like? That sort of thing to get inspired, because it's really hard to make anything in a box. You really do need to click other things, like find other things that are going to inspire you. I'm trying to think. There's typically at a bit larger company, there's a lot of meetings, which is a bummer. Meetings really suck my energy, but meetings about the agile process. So maybe you're reviewing tickets, and there's in that meeting, there might be a ticket to create like a certain screen. And that's the opportunity where I might pull up the design and say, this is the screen, this is what's attached to the ticket, this is how it works, just a little bit more collaboration time all together as a group to make sure that people are understanding what their tickets are and where to find the designs for them. There's, of course, like sizing meetings, figuring out how large or small a project is going to be. It's a lot of agile style meetings that just pertain to that process. Um, what else? What else is a typical day? That's kind of a lot. That's kind of a well-rounded what happens at a company. And then as a freelancer, it depends on if I'm currently working on a gig, which I am now, and it's just go, 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 wake up, design, 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 check in with the client, make sure they're happy, and then go, go, go. I find that I don't like to be idle, especially if I know that there's something I can do. And I would probably say I work more in bursts as a freelancer, and then I like, whoosh, take a break, and then, deal with the next client, do the next project, and work in bursts. Um, Lots of presenting, lots of decks, a lot more deck designs, to make sure that I walk through each piece of of my process, because sometimes the people I work with are from the tech, have a tech background, and sometimes they don't. And so if they don't, I definitely have to walk them through a little bit more about why I'm doing certain things, or where we are in the process and what we need to do next. Um, and if I'm working with a tech if I'm consulting for a tech company, it kind of just does feel like I'm back in a full-time role.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome sauce. Cool.
And then
So
if I'm not working, other thing is I'm going to networking events. I am trying to chase down clients. There's people who reach out to me all the time who are like, hey, I have this idea for this thing, or hey, so and so said that they needed it. And it immediately feels like, oh my God, they need something right now. But then I don't hear anything for months. But then they come back and they're like, okay, we're ready. So sometimes it's just checking in with those clients every so often to see where they're at, where their head is at, and when they're ready to start the projects.
for sure, for sure. So I guess like just to kind of try and big picture, working for a company as a product designer is very similar to working as a company. It sounds like as a as a full-time developer or software engineer, and there may be a well-run company will have less meetings, but there's still always meetings, right? Versus some companies, you can absolutely spend all your time in meetings and not getting the work done. That's not the best place because you're taking your work home with you. But when you're a freelancer as well, picking up your own clients, now you have this onus to actually, nurture potential clients right while you're working on other projects. And so you have this extra overhead, which as a product designer, you really have to be someone who wants to communicate with people, right?
Yep.
Sometimes as software developers, we don't always want to communicate with people. So if you want to minimize how, you always have to communicate with people, it's kind of inescapable. But if you want to minimize it, I would say go be a software developer for a company versus a freelancer. Because I know some of our students have also expressed interest in, oh, can I just be a freelancer or do contract work? It's like, well, yes, you can, but if you don't have a long enough term contract, right, for product designer, I think, Deena, when we spoke, you had mentioned product design, it's like a 2 to 3 month thing typically, or 3 to 6. Can you just clarify like how long that product design process typically takes
It really
around?
depends. I'm working on a project right now that we're creating a brand new app in 2 weeks, which is absolutely insane. And I'm designing everything within those 2 weeks. And it's a pretty straightforward product. Like, it's a chatbot
Okay.
and a map. So it's not anything
Okay.
absolutely crazy. We're not reinventing the wheel. But I didn't do any user research. We're not doing any user testing. It's a very
Right. You don't
bare
have time.
bones, just don't have time. They don't want it. Sometimes clients are just more about, let's ship it live and see what happens and test it, A/B test, or come back to it and just see what happens when it's out in the wild. Which some startups like to move that quickly. So it really
Right.
depends on the client. But I'm losing my way here. What's the
No
question
worries.
again?
But a thorough design process that you prefer to be
Oh,
a part
yes.
of versus the 2 week sprint is like, was it 2 to 3 months that you mentioned? I was
It
just
could
getting
be,
a
yeah, definitely, especially if you're having all the user research and the user testing, because it takes a while to like recruit people, to get those surveys filled out, all that kind of stuff.
right.
Yeah, I would
Exactly.
say, yeah, 2 months is general,
Awesome.
and that's like brand new app. That's like going from zero to a product.
Right. And I would assume like if you have additional, if you already have some work done, right, you might focus it and it could take different amounts of time for sure. But it sounds like just big picture, a product designer is someone that's going to interact with people a lot because your job is to design it for the users versus an engineer whose job is like, here, give me the spec, give me the requirements, tell me what you want me to build, and I'm going to go build it. Right. You still have to work on a team. You still have to communicate with people and like your project manager or whoever's overseeing you, if you have a boss, right? Like there's still interaction, but it's not like the day to day. So if you're someone that really likes technology, but really prefers to like talk to people, right? Like one of these other roles like product designer, project manager might be appropriate versus a developer who's, mainly focused on like building things and talking to the computer all day long, right? Like I guess there's just kind of different flavors. Is that kind of accurate to your experience?
Yeah, I think that sounds accurate for sure. I think it would be, yeah, hard to be a contractor and go into a coding hold. It just really, I think that you might have to walk through a little bit more, like you said, communicate a little bit more with the client.
Right, exactly. So like it kind of just depends on how you choose to have your day and what elements do you want in it. Like all these elements, you're working on a computer, right? Like you're working in technology, you have to be able to communicate with engineers, but at the same time, right, it's a different type of work. So like I think just being open and honest with ourselves about what kind of work do we enjoy doing the most, right? And then making your day around that, making your career around that, which you've done a wonderful job at, Deena. That's awesome. So good. Thank you for sharing. Oh my
Sure.
goodness. So did you so when you came to product design, did you come through as a coder or you came through just like because you said that there was no training for product designers. So like did you have prior background before you made this transition?
My background was graphic design. I
Okay, cool.
was, yeah, I was doing like packaging, posters, um, almost no like computer graphics and branding, stuff like that, which all is really, really great to have as a tool when I'm working on UI, because that's kind of where the most visual elements obviously come into play. But when I started as an intern and just jumped right into app design, I had luckily somebody else with me, one manager who also came from a graphic design background because everyone came from a graphic design background in product design because there was no product design background. Um, and we just would sit and design together and be like, does this look right? Does this look right? How does this other app do it? How do our users want to do it? So it's really just a lot of try. It was a lot of trial and error and copying frameworks that other people have already created.
Awesome. So good. That's amazing. Cool. So and that's cool to know that like you don't necessarily need a lot of coding background necessarily to be effective as a product designer. So that's kind of neat.
Definitely not.
But
You could be if you do know how to code. I mean, you will be a unicorn and you'll get like three times as much money. And if
awesome.
you do have like like a artistic ability or like that design eye, you'll be able to create really, really, really cool products that look really polished for the user, or maybe even have like really interesting interactive movement elements in your work. Like there's when you know front end as a designer, which I'm very limited, um, it it opens up this playground that you would never be able to do just in the back end. And as a designer, I would never even know is possible. So knowing the technology and having that design eye is definitely an amazing skill.
That's awesome. Cool. Thank you so much. So I guess, what would you wish to tell your former self about the journey to get to where you are in your career, as a successful product designer who's, living the dream
I think I would tell myself not to stress out so much. And it's okay if it's not perfect. It's okay if it doesn't look exactly how you want it. It's actually better to leave something designed not perfectly and come back to it than it is to sit and really try to make it perfect. Same thing, you kind of have to let projects go and say, it doesn't necessarily look how I want, but there's a due date and that's the due date. But the benefit is that once you finish that project, you get another project and you get another project, you get another project. And that's when you're growing. That's when you're creating perfection. It's not each project you get to perfection. It's you got to do the whole process a million times before it gets perfect. And I think as a junior designer, it was really hard for me to make things look how I wanted. So I would just spend so much time stressing about that and sitting and reworking the same project over and over again. And it's not helpful.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. Oh my goodness. I love that. And we all face it, right? Especially in agile and development as well. It's like, well, you can always make it better, right? There's always something else you could do. There's always more to learn. And this happens to learners too when they're just getting started. Oh, but to be able to use, this JavaScript library, I have to read this whole book on it, right? Well, maybe, but maybe you can just, sample just a couple pages from this chapter and move on, right? And you could always put that on your Christmas wish list, right? To sit on a holiday vacation on a beach somewhere and read that for fun. I'm sorry, I have never brought a coding book on vacation and read it. I I
Don't do
ha-
it.
I did I have brought coding books to the maternity ward when I was like, oh, I'm gonna be so bored after the baby's out. No, I've never once touched them. So I have occasionally brought them in optimism, but never ever, right? So like, but there's always more to do and learn, and so sometimes it's also about finding that balance between overcommitting ourselves. Like you were talking about, like, oh, I was trying to make it perfect. I was redoing the same thing, and it was already done. I feel like sometimes, as technologists, that's always a challenge because we're always doing new things. Right?
Mhm.
Technology is always advancing. We're always doing new things, right? And so, like, oh, to help us feel confident, sometimes we feel that need to overdo it a little bit, right? Versus just putting it out there. At the same time, we don't want to put out like stuff that's not good enough either, that doesn't actually do the job. So it's finding that balance, that sweet spot between something that's functional, that will do the job, but not overdoing it with excessive perfectionism. I do consider myself a recovering perfectionist for sure. So I completely resonate.
Yep, yep, yep. It's tough. It's tough.
Awesome stuff. Yeah, for real. Awesome. Thank you so much, Deena. So, Deena, anything else, any advice that you'd give to aspiring technologists, going on the job market, who are just starting out with their careers? Any advice that you could leave them with? And again, if anyone has questions, now is the moment. I'll switch those next. So, thank you, Deena. Can you share with us any advice for the people coming up behind trying to get these careers in tech?
Yeah. I think be open to the idea that your role is going to change drastically throughout your entire career. Like you're going to be a freelancer, you're going to work in house, you're going to work at a startup, you're going to work at an agency. Like be open to the idea that those might happen to you in your full circle of life. Because um, when I worked at WeWork for 8 years. And when I finally quit, I was like, oh my God, I have to get a job in a big company exactly like that. Um, and and the truth is you kind of need to do something else. You kind of do need a little bit of a career shift. Plus, like you said, the technology is always changing. So how you do your job is going to be different year to year. And you have to be open to that idea too, and not be afraid that it's changing, because all the technology is, and you guys know this, it's like it's a tool. And if you know how to use the tool and you're able to be a conceptual like problem solver, you're able to come up with good ideas, you're never not going to have work. It's when you just rely on the technology to do your work and you're not kind of thinking outside of that box, that you might feel like, oh, the technology is catching up with me and I'm not going to be able to keep up. Yeah, those are kind of my two things.
Awesome. Awesome, Deena. I love that. When I love this idea of, like, not being able to keep up with technology, which is totally like off base, right? Like obviously that's how you said it. But that, right, like the idea is to kind of think ahead of the technology, of like where it's of tracking the trends and where it's going. So you can kind of prepare that
Yeah,
it's not about being obsolete, but just paying attention. Right. And
yeah,
I think this kind of goes into coding education as well, because oftentimes we'll see students that, I'm one of them, that came from other different types of training programs, and all they didn't really learn to like actually create and solve the problems, right? They just learned potentially how to follow the leader at the front of the room, which isn't going to solve problems, because in technology, we are constantly being asked to solve new problems that have never been done before. Because by its definition, if someone else had solved it already, we wouldn't actually need to be building it, right? So like you're only going to be asked to do new things that have never quite been done that exact way before, right? Product designers, project managers, developers, everybody in tech. And so getting comfortable with this idea that, you have to learn the process for actually solving problems in your space. Like that is what you take to the bank. And it's not what technology is hot or if this new library can do that. Like, sure, you can have combos about that, but what do you pin your career on? It's your ability as a problem solver and honing that skill, right? How to innovate in your space and how to solve problems. That's what it's really all about, right? So I
Yeah,
agree.
yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Awesome. I love it. Thank you so much, Deena. Job Coding Academy students, if there's any other questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat. I'm not seeing any others in the Facebook group. We did the things a little differently today, so I'm super excited that people were able to comment and share. But super excited. So thank you again so much, Deena, for joining us.
Hmm.
It's just been so lovely having you. And stay tuned. Deena might help us out, on some of the product design things moving forward. I'm super excited to get her insights. All right. Have a great rest of your day, guys, and we'll talk soon. Okay. Have a good one.